On November 24, 2025, a chunk of one of Miami's most expensive buildings broke off, fell, and crashed onto the pool deck below. Luckily, nobody was sitting there, but that didn't matter. Because the building I'm talking about is the Aston Martin Tower, with 66 floors, $1 billion in sales, and the single most prestigious address in Miami. So how is it already crumbling less than 2 years after opening? Buckle up, because the falling concrete might not even be the worst thing happening inside. Chapter 1. The building that's falling apart from the inside. Let's start with that flying piece of concrete, because it's the perfect symbol for everything wrong here. A metal cap, the thing that seals one of the steel cables running through the building's structure, detached from the exterior of a 66-story luxury tower and went sailing down onto the pool deck. Think about that height for a second. A piece of debris falling from a building that tall doesn't just plop down. It travels hundreds of feet, picking up speed the whole way before it hits whatever's below. The only reason this isn't a tragedy is that the lounge chair it could have hit happened to be empty that afternoon. Pure chance. And this isn't some forgotten, neglected old building. This is the Aston Martin Residences at 300 Biscayne Boulevard Way, a gleaming sail-shaped tower at the mouth of the Miami River that opened its doors in April 2024. At the time, it was the most exclusive new address in the entire city. Units sold for millions. The crown jewel at the top is a triplex penthouse that went for $59 million, and it came with an actual Aston Martin Vulcan supercar parked in the living room, one of only 24 on the planet. This was the pinnacle of luxury living, the best of the best. So here's the question that should be bugging you already. How does a brand new billion-dollar building, wearing the name of a company famous for obsessive engineering precision, start shedding pieces of itself within 2 years? Buildings aren't supposed to do that. Ever. A high-rise that's properly built doesn't drop concrete onto its own pool deck. And as the people who actually live there were about to discover, that falling cap wasn't a freak accident. It was a symptom. The first visible crack in a story that goes a lot deeper and a lot darker than anyone expected. To understand how we got here, you have to go back to who built this thing and the promise they made. Chapter 2. The Grocery Billionaire and the Name That Sold Everything. For years, the patch of land where this tower now stands just sat there empty, which, if you know Miami real estate, is almost unbelievable. Because this wasn't just any plot. It sits right at the mouth of the Miami River, where the river spills into Biscayne Bay, one of the most jaw-droppingly valuable stretches of waterfront in all of South Florida. Developers had eyed it for years. Plan after plan got floated and then died. The land just kept waiting. Then, in 2014, along came a man named German Koto, who paid roughly $125 million just for the dirt. And Koto's backstory is genuinely interesting. His family fortune came from building one of the largest supermarket chains in Argentina. So this was a grocery dynasty from South America, looking to plant a giant glittering flag in American luxury real estate. This tower was going to be the statement piece. And the concept Koto landed on had literally never been done anywhere on Earth. He partnered with Aston Martin, yes, the British automaker, the James Bond car company, the people whose vehicles start at 200 grand, to create the world's first ever Aston Martin branded residential building. Picture the pitch: 66 floors, a private super yacht marina at the base, a helipad on the roof, an infinity pool on the 55th floor, and that name on the door. A name that, for over 100 years, has meant one single thing: precision. Nothing rushed, nothing skipped. The same obsessive standard behind every hand-built engine, now supposedly behind every wall. The pitch worked beautifully. By 2022, the developer was reporting that 99% of the units were sold, pulling in over $100 million in revenue in just the first 2 months of the year. Buyers weren't just purchasing square footage. They were buying an identity, the prestige of the badge. But here's the detail buried in the fine print that almost nobody reading those glossy brochures actually understood. And it's the single most important fact in this entire story. Speaking of paying a fortune just for the name on the box, that's the trap someone on our team finally dodged with the Pulse R8 Smart Ring. It tracks your heart rate, your sleep, and your workout straight from your finger. A week on a single charge, 100 days with the case, and it's fully waterproof. The part that got us was the price. Under $40, a fraction of what the big-name rings cost, because it comes direct instead of through the retailers that mark everything up. If you're watching on your TV, pause and scan the QR code on screen with your phone camera, or tap the first link in the description. Because these buyers paid for the badge and missed the fine print that changes everything. Chapter 3. The fine print trick nobody read. Here's what every single buyer assumed: that Aston Martin, the precision engineering legends, were standing behind this building, watching the construction, signing off on the concrete, putting their century-old reputation on the line. They weren't, not even a little. Aston Martin's entire role in this project ended at the logo. The automaker wasn't financing the tower. It wasn't managing the construction. It didn't inspect a single concrete pour or sign off on 1 inch of waterproofing. This was a licensing deal. Aston Martin rented out its name, collected its fee, and stayed completely out of the actual building. The real responsibility for designing and constructing this thing sat entirely with the developer and his local team, a general contractor called Coastal Construction, plus the architects and engineers hired for the job. The famous name sold every unit in the building, but it would not appear on a single one of the legal filings when things went wrong. And I want you to sit with how clever and how cold that structure actually is, because it's the secret engine of this whole disaster. Think about it like a magic trick with 3 players. The brand licenses its name, takes the money, and walks away before anyone moves in. The developer collects the sales revenue, builds the thing, and structures the deal to limit his own exposure. And the buyers? The buyers are left holding a building. When the cracks show up, and in Florida they almost always show up, the brand isn't named in any lawsuit, writes no check, and faces 0 consequences for what was built under its name. A logo, it turns out, is not a guarantee. It was never designed to be one. So that was the setup. The name, the marina, the helipad, the dream. Now here's what the people who actually moved in discovered when they finally got to peek behind the curtain. And it reads less like a punch list and more like an autopsy. Chapter 4. The Autopsy Report. In Florida, there's a standard process for how a new condo building works. While it's being built and sold, the developer controls the building's board. Then, once enough units are sold, control gets handed over to the people who actually live there. It's routine. It happened here in March 2025. And the moment the residents took control, they did the smart thing. They hired an independent engineering firm, Epic Forensics and Engineering, to inspect every system in the building and report exactly what they found, with 0 obligation to protect anyone's reputation. This is called a turnover assessment, and it's the inspection that exposed everything. What came back was genuinely alarming. The engineers documented cracking and crumbling concrete, what's technically called spalling, throughout the tower. Unsealed holes in the building's exterior shell. Reinforcing steel left exposed to the open, salty air. Defects in the masonry, the stucco, the waterproofing, the fire protection systems, and the seawall along the river. The report flagged problems across nearly every major system in the building. Not a few items missed in a rushed final walkthrough. Defects that, according to the engineers, were baked into the structure from the very beginning. But the balconies were the part that made everyone's blood run cold. The engineers found erosion and loose concrete along the slab edges. The exact spots where a falling chunk has a clear shot all the way down to the sidewalk. They flagged it as an immediate life safety risk. One balcony was even described as visibly drooping. Residents started finding chunks of concrete on their own balconies, holes that exposed rusting steel underneath, shattered glass with no explanation. People reported they flat out refused to step out onto their own balconies. The best view in Miami, the thing they paid millions for, and they wouldn't walk on it. As the association's attorney put it, comparing the developer's work to a luxury car. It's like buying an SUV and finding out they never painted the back quarter panel. And then there's why all of this is so much scarier in Miami specifically, which comes down to the invisible skeleton holding the whole building up. Chapter 5. The ticking clock inside the walls. To understand why those cracks are a 5-alarm emergency and not just an ugly inconvenience, you need to know how a tower like this actually stays standing. And it's genuinely fascinating, in a terrifying way. A skyscraper like this is held together by something called post-tensioning. Picture steel cables, called tendons, threaded right through the concrete of every single floor slab, then pulled incredibly tight under thousands of pounds of force. That tension is what gives the floors the strength to hold up everything above them, including the floor over your head right now. It's the building's hidden skeleton, and the whole system works on one condition: the concrete sealing those cables has to stay intact. As long as the steel is protected inside the concrete, you're fine. Now here's the problem. The engineers found that some of those post-tension cables were already exposed, and once steel is exposed, it starts to corrode. In a dry place, say Kansas, that corrosion happens slowly enough that you'd catch it on a routine maintenance check. It's an annoyance, not a crisis. But this building sits directly on the edge of Biscayne Bay, soaking in salt air 24 hours a day. And salt air doesn't just speed corrosion up a little, it makes it race. The clock that would tick slowly in a dry climate is sprinting here, and it's ticking toward the steel cables that are literally holding the floors together. According to the assessment, these weren't problems caused by weather over years of use. They were there before the first resident ever turned a key. The building, in the engineer's telling, wasn't slowly falling apart. It was delivered that way, and water, in a building surrounded by water, made all of it worse. The pool and spa systems were allegedly installed improperly, driving active leaks straight into the structure. The seawall along the river was cracking and corroding. Even the fire sprinkler system had loose joints leaking water inside the building. Water was getting into all the places the design was specifically supposed to keep it out. Several of these conditions were flagged as needing immediate fixing, which dropped the residents into a genuinely infuriating trap. But to really understand how they got robbed twice, you have to follow the money. And that's where this story takes a turn from bad construction into something that sounds almost criminal. Chapter 6. The $5 million Shell Game. So the residents are now staring at a list of urgent life safety repairs they have to pay for out of their own pockets, money collected from the owners, before any court can even decide who caused the mess. They're paying to fix a building they didn't break. And while they were digging into all of this, they hired forensic accountants to trace where the building's money had actually been going under the old developer-controlled board. What those accountants allegedly found is, honestly, the wildest part of the whole saga. According to a separate lawsuit filed in early 2026 focused entirely on the money, the developer-controlled board had allegedly been running what the association's attorneys called an immense shell game. Here's the gist of the accusation. Before handing over control, the board allegedly steered the building's big service contracts, management, concierge, security, valet, cleaning, to companies owned or controlled by German Koto and his own associates. And the specifics are eye-popping. A security vendor with barely any track record allegedly landed a contract worth close to $800,000 without competitive bidding. A concierge company allegedly billed more than $34,000 every single month, with paperwork so thin the association couldn't even confirm the services were ever performed. The association was allegedly charged $70,000 in rent for a management office in a unit owned by a Koto-controlled entity when there was free office space available elsewhere in the building. And the kicker? According to the lawsuit, a bunch of these contracts were signed in the days immediately before the developer handed over control. And when the new board took possession, the computers that were legally supposed to come with full financial records had allegedly been wiped clean. The fraud lawsuit seeks more than $5 million and a full accounting of every dollar that moved through that building. The association's attorney, a guy who's been doing this a long time, said he had never seen this level of brazen self-dealing in his entire career. Now, in fairness, and this matters, these are allegations, and the developer is fighting back hard. A spokesperson for the developer entity said they partnered with the industry's most experienced suppliers, and that they believe the claims are unfounded. They've suggested the current owner's board may be trying to shift responsibility for its own decisions, and said they're confident the legal process will lead to a fair outcome. The contractor says it stands by its work and will defend itself vigorously. None of this has been proven in court yet. But there's one promise from the brochure that wasn't a construction defect or a contract. It was just, apparently, made up. Chapter 7. The beach club that was literally a fairy tale. This might be my favorite detail in the whole story because it's so brazen it's almost funny, until you remember people paid millions based on it. Michael Diaz Jr. is a Miami attorney who bought a unit in the building and got elected president of the condo association after the residents took over. And the sales materials every buyer received promised something specific and fancy. Exclusive beach club access at the Ritz-Carlton on Key Biscayne, a private ferry to take residents over, a reserved stretch of sand, the whole golden lifestyle package. So one of Diaz's first moves as president was to call up the Ritz-Carlton to sort out the logistics of this exclusive arrangement. Reasonable, right? Just nailing down the details of a perk his neighbors were all promised. The hotel's response stopped him cold. Because, as Diaz put it afterward, the only thing accurate about the promised ferry was that it was, in his words, a fairy tale. Nothing more, nothing less. The beach club had never existed. Not as a lapsed deal, not as a partnership still being worked out. It had simply never existed in any form the hotel even recognized. It was, allegedly, marketing fiction printed in a brochure to help sell condos. And Diaz wasn't alone. Every single buyer in that building had been sold the same dream. The marina, the helipad, the private ferry. According to the lawsuit, none of it was properly delivered the way it was sold. So now stack it all up and look at what these owners actually got versus what they paid for. They were sold precision. They got falling concrete. They were sold an exclusive beach club. They got a fairy tale. They were sold a secure investment run with integrity. They got allegedly a shell game with their own money. They were sold the best balconies in Miami. They got balconies they're too scared to stand on. The gap between the rendering and the rebar, between the brand on the brochure and the name on the lawsuit, turned out to be enormous. But here's the genuinely unsettling part. The thing that should make anyone shopping for a shiny new Florida condo nervous. This isn't a one-building problem. Chapter 8. The secret isn't the tower, it's the system. Here's the reveal this whole video has been building toward. The secret reason this billion-dollar tower is failing isn't really about this tower at all. It's about the system that produced it. A system that, according to the experts, virtually guarantees this outcome over and over again. Don't take my word for it. The same attorney representing these owners also represented the owners of another Miami luxury tower, Missoni Baia, branded by the Italian fashion house Missoni, who sued their developer over dozens of alleged construction defects. Cracked foundations, water intrusion, broken elevators. Different brand, different building, nearly identical story. And it doesn't stop there. 1000 Museum, a stunning tower designed by world-famous architect Zaha Hadid, just down the road, is facing its own construction defect lawsuits. The attorney described it as a vicious cycle that doesn't end, and said that virtually every new high-rise condominium in Florida goes through some version of it. Not some. Not most. Virtually every one. When ending up in court over how it was built is the baseline expectation for a brand new luxury building. You're not looking at one bad apple. You're looking at a rotten barrel. And the mechanics of why are infuriatingly simple. Buyers commit millions based on glossy renderings and a famous logo. The developer controls the board through completion. Exactly the window when owners have the least visibility into what's happening with their money and their concrete. The city issues a temporary certificate of occupancy that lets everyone move in before hidden defects ever surface. And by the time the owners take control, hire their own engineers, and discover the truth, the developer has already collected the cash and structured the deal to walk away clean. The risk gets quietly transferred onto the people who can least afford it, the individual owners, while the profits already left the building. And hanging over all of it is the shadow of Surfside, the 2021 condo collapse near Miami that killed 98 people and was traced to exactly this kind of slow structural rot and deferred problems. That tragedy was supposed to change everything. The fact that turnover inspections keep uncovering buildings delivered with embedded defects suggests the underlying incentives haven't changed nearly enough. So that's the secret. The Aston Martin Residences isn't failing because of one careless contractor or one bad developer. It's failing because it was built inside a machine that rewards the logo, protects the developer, and hands the bill to whoever's left holding the keys. The most expensive branded tower in Miami became the loudest possible proof of it. And the genuinely chilling thought to end on is this. The same model is already approved, already selling, already rising across South Florida right now. And the people buying into the next one have absolutely no idea they might be next. If deep dives into the truth behind the world's flashiest buildings and biggest empires are what brought you here, subscribe to Global Status and we'll keep delivering them. Catch you in the next one.